10 people vanished from a ship that had 6 months of food and no damage. The Mary Celeste was found adrift on December 5, 1872, by a British crew who expected a routine salvage. Instead, they found personal belongings untouched, the cargo intact, and not a single soul aboard. An official inquiry ruled out piracy, mutiny, and violence entirely. But ruling out the dramatic theories only leaves the quieter ones, and those may be the most disturbing of all. The Mary Celeste began her life as the Amazon, a Canadian-built brigantine that later sailed under an American flag. She was a 282-ton vessel, compact but sturdy, and she carried cargo across the Atlantic every week in the 1870s. By the time she left New York Harbor on November 7, 1872, she'd already survived more than her share of trouble. That history included the sudden death of her first captain and a collision with another vessel in the English Channel. Those mishaps earned her a new name and, among some sailors, a reputation. Captain Benjamin S. Briggs was an experienced seaman, well regarded among the merchant crews that sailed out of New York, and he wasn't the type to panic over a little rough water. For this voyage, he brought his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, along with 8 crewmen. 10 people in all were bound for Genoa, Italy, with a cargo hold full of 1,700 barrels of crude alcohol. The voyage looked routine. The weather stayed fair, the crew proved capable, and the ship held together. That much we know for certain. On the morning of November 25th, Briggs entered the final note in the ship's log. He noted that the Mary Celeste sat within sight of Santa Maria, the southernmost island of the Azores. Everything appeared normal, no distress signal was sent, and no other vessel reported seeing her in any trouble whatsoever. After that entry, the record falls silent for nearly 10 days. When the De Gratia's boarding party climbed onto the Mary Celeste on December 5, 1872, they found a ship that seemed almost untouched. Her captain, her family, and her entire crew had vanished, yet the cargo was intact. 6 months of supplies remained in the stores below deck, and the ship herself showed no damage at all. Nobody remained to explain it. The only obvious abnormalities were a few feet of water in the hold and a single missing lifeboat. The ship remained seaworthy, her personal belongings lay undisturbed, and her sails hung as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment. Those sailors had expected an ordinary salvage. Instead, they stepped into a case file that no inquiry has ever closed. The most unsettling part wasn't what the boarding party found, it was what they didn't find. No blood, no weapons drawn, no sign of a struggle anywhere on the decks or in the cabins. The final log entry had been made 10 days earlier on November 25th. The ship had sat within sight of the Azores island of Santa Maria, about 500 miles from where she now drifted. In those 10 days, something had convinced 10 people to leave a ship that was still sailing. A captain does not abandon a sound vessel lightly. Briggs was experienced, cautious, and he had his family with him. The decision to leave the Mary Celeste must have felt necessary at the time, which only deepens the question. What could possibly make a man gather his wife, his toddler, and 8 sailors into a single lifeboat and cast off from a ship that was still under sail? The inquiry. The De Gratia crew did what maritime law required. They brought the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where a formal court began what we would now call an official investigation. But the inquiry that followed did not produce the answers everyone expected. The court officers inspected the vessel, interviewed the salvagers, and considered every possibility of foul play, looking for blood, signs of violence, or any evidence that the crew had been attacked and killed. They found nothing at all. The inquiry lasted for weeks. In the end, the court concluded that there was no evidence of piracy, mutiny, or murder, and the court awarded salvage payment to the De Gratia crew for recovering the vessel and bringing her safely to port. Yet the court's verdict left the central question wide open. If nobody attacked the ship, then why was it empty? The official record is clear about what did not happen. It's almost silent about what did. That's where the record gets complicated. The last log entry placed the ship near Santa Maria on November 25th, yet she turned up about 500 miles to the northeast on December 5th, adrift and under full sail. Those 9 or 10 days are the gap where the real mystery lives. We know the weather had been rough in the region, and we know the Mary Celeste carried a manual pump to manage bilge water. Beyond that, the archive holds only this much, and the rest is reconstruction. Historians have spent more than a century trying to fill that silence, but the court's actual findings have been drowned out by louder, more dramatic stories that sold newspapers and filled lecture halls. The official inquiry found no monster, no ghost, and no conspiracy. What it found was a ship in good order and a timeline that simply does not add up. That absence of drama is, in a way, the most troubling thing of all. The myths. Within a decade of the inquiry, the Mary Celeste had become something she never was. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle published a short story in 1884 that added entirely fictional elements to the case, including an ex-slave seeking vengeance and violent deaths that never happened aboard the real vessel. Those invented details became widely confused with the actual record, and they shaped popular understanding of the mystery for generations. The name itself became distorted. Newspapers and magazines repeatedly called her the Mary Celeste, a small error that signaled how little fact-checking accompanied the myth-making. Popular magazines spread increasingly wild theories. Some claimed a giant octopus had pulled the crew into the sea, or that a waterspout had lifted them off the deck without leaving a single mark on the rails or the rigging. Others suggested pirates had boarded, killed everyone, and somehow cleaned the ship so thoroughly that no investigator could find a trace. These stories spread because they offered the closure that the real case stubbornly refused to provide. Most popular accounts stop here, but the actual record demands that we keep going. The myth-making served a purpose. It turned a frustratingly incomplete court record into a satisfying narrative with villains and victims. But the cost was steep, because every invented detail pushed the actual testimony further into the background, until the Mary Celeste became a ghost story instead of a historical case file. That's the official story. And here's what the sources actually say. The evidence. Let's separate what we know from what we're inferring. The primary sources tell one story, but later retellings changed it, often to make the case more dramatic than the evidence actually supports. When you look at the original court findings, we know the ship was seaworthy, the cargo was intact, and the lifeboat was missing. Those 3 facts rule out several popular theories immediately. Piracy makes little sense. The cargo held value and remained completely untouched. And no pirate in the 1870s would have killed a crew and then tidied up the ship before leaving without taking a single barrel of crude alcohol with him. Mutiny is equally unlikely, because Briggs commanded respect, his crew had experience, and no trace of fighting appeared anywhere on the vessel. If the crew had turned on their captain, they would not have gathered into a single lifeboat and vanished together. The alcohol theory is more interesting. The Mary Celeste carried 1,700 barrels of crude alcohol in her hold, and some investigators have suggested that fumes built up and caused an explosion or a fire that drove the crew onto the deck in terror. But the ship showed no burn marks, no scorching, and no damage that would indicate a blast. An explosion large enough to panic the crew would have left clear evidence on the timbers. No such evidence exists. Which brings us to the most plausible explanation. In 2007, a documentary team proposed that a faulty chronometer, rough seas, and a clogged pump could have convinced Briggs that his ship was sinking faster than she was. The Azores sit in a region of unstable weather, and the log suggests the crew had been dealing with rough conditions. A clogged pump would have allowed bilge water to rise, and a faulty chronometer could have made Briggs misjudge his position. He may have believed land was closer than it was, ordered an evacuation, and watched his ship sail away without him. Why it stays unsolved. This is where corroboration matters more than drama. One theory alone proves very little. A broken chronometer, a clogged pump, and rough weather are each plausible on their own. But we cannot confirm that any of them actually happened on this particular voyage, because the evidence simply hasn't survived. Their lifeboat never turned up, and the bodies were never recovered. Think of this less as a mystery and more as a gap in the record. That ocean keeps its secrets, and in this case, it kept them completely. The Mary Celeste's own afterlife is strange. She sailed for another 12 years under different owners before her final captain deliberately ran her aground in Haiti as part of an insurance fraud. In 2001, novelist Clive Cussler claimed to have found her wreck, but analysis of the retrieved timbers showed the wood continued growing at least a decade after she sank, so the find was debunked. Even the ship's physical trace became a controversy. And that seems fitting for a vessel whose real story was always less about what happened and more about what we cannot know. The mystery endures because the gap in the record is more unsettling than any ghost story. And 10 people made a decision based on what they believed was happening before the Atlantic gave them no second chance. Subscribe if you want more investigations that separate fact from myth.